You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
Europe's history is littered with violence, but few words chill the blood like genocide. What does genocide mean, and how has it haunted the continent? From the harrying of the North in 11th century England, where up to 75% of a region's population vanished, to the Holocaust that claimed over 20 million lives, genocide is not a relic, it's a recurring nightmare. Now, you might ask, have we really moved on? We like to tell ourselves never again, but the truth is more complicated. Even as we vow to learn, history whispers warnings. Let me tell you a story about how, even in our so-called enlightened era, the specter of genocide rose again in Europa, specifically in Bosnia during the 1990s. But before we zero in on Bosnia, let's clarify two crucial terms: ethnic cleansing, the forced removal of a group, and genocide, systematic destruction of that group. Today, we're diving deep into the Bosnian Genocide, its roots, its horrors, and the lessons we desperately need to remember. What held Yugoslavia together after World War II? The answer: a patchwork of 6 republics: Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Macedonia, Montenegro, and Slovenia, glued with strong leadership and shared identity. This was the vision of Josip Broz Tito, the charismatic president who ruled from 1953 to 1980. Tito suppressed ethnic conflict and promoted brotherhood and unity, a form of civic nationalism meant to override deep-rooted ethnic divides. But what happens when that glue dissolves? Well, after Tito's death, leadership faltered. Terms like federalism, power shared between central and regional governments, and nationalism, loyalty to one's ethnic group, became battlegrounds. Without Tito's iron hand, old suspicions resurfaced. People once Yugoslavian became, once again, Serb, Croat, Bosniak. The result? A ticking time bomb under the fragile federation. So ask yourself, how do divided identities sow the seeds for mass violence? This is where our story begins. Imagine a leader who tells you, only our group can keep you safe. That's ethnonationalists placing the nation's fate in the hands of a single ethnicity. In late 1980s Yugoslavia, politicians like Slobodan Milošević, Serbia, Franjo Tudman, Croatia, and Radovan Karadzic, Bosnian Serb, exploited these fears. They rewrote history, painted neighbors as threats, and promised protection. Here's a hypothetical. You're in a mixed Bosnian town. The radio blares tales of ancient betrayal. Suddenly, your Croat neighbor isn't a friend, he's a rival. This is propaganda, the deliberate spread of biased information, and polarization, the process of driving groups apart. Now you might think, could I resist such manipulation? But in times of crisis, fear is a potent weapon. These leaders didn't just divide, they prepared the ground for violence. When the old bonds snap, what's left but suspicion and anger? That's the combustible mix that fueled the Yugoslav wars. The collapse of Yugoslavia didn't happen overnight. It fractured through a series of brutal war sieges with its own logic and horror. Between 1991 and 2001, conflicts erupted as republics tried to break free from Belgrade's control. Terms like secession, when a region breaks away to form its own country, and insurgency and armed rebellion became everyday realities. There were classic wars of independence, like Croatia's 4-year battle, and insurgencies like those in Macedonia. Albanians, left stateless, fought for rights in places like the Sarajevo Valley, but nowhere did the violence reach the apocalyptic scale it did in Bosnia. Why? Because Bosnia was a true melting pot: Muslims, Serbs, and Croats living side by side. When war came, neighbor turned on neighbor. Let's shift focus now to Bosnia's independence referendum, the spark that ignited the genocide. Picture this: March 1992. Bosnia holds a referendum. The question: independence or union? An overwhelming 99.7% vote for freedom, but many Serbs boycott, fearing they'll become a minority. In response, Bosnian Serbs declare their own republic and appeal to Serbia for help. The Dayton Accords, the peace treaty that would later end the war, were still years away, and international recognition of Bosnia meant little on the ground. Now, here's an important distinction. Sovereignty means self-rule, but in Bosnia, that ideal was instantly contested. Armed groups sprang up, and the capital, Sarajevo, was besieged. You might wonder, why didn't the world intervene sooner? The answer is as complex as the conflict itself, involving geopolitics, hesitation, and tragic misjudgment. As war erupted, a pattern emerged: ethnic cleansing, mass displacement, and, as we'll see, systematic extermination. This is where genocide took hold. Let's zoom in on two infamous attacks: the Sarajevo market massacres and the Tuzla massacre. Both were shocking not just for their brutality, but for their utter lack of military purpose. In February 1994, and again in August 1995, mortars rained down on Sarajevo's Markale marketplace. Picture a bustling market, civilians buying fruit, children playing, when suddenly a single shell turns the scene into carnage. 68 dead, 144 wounded in the first attack alone. Tuzla's Kapija Square met a similar fate in May 1995. Artillery pounded a youth-filled leisure quarter, killing 71 and injuring 240, most under 25. These weren't collateral damage, a military term for unintended casualties. These were deliberate acts of terror. Serbian forces denied responsibility, even suggesting false flags and old disinformation tactic. But international forensics left no doubt. These were targeted massacres. So, why target civilians? The chilling answer? To sow fear, break resistance, and accelerate ethnic division, classic tools of genocide. Let's take a closer look at Vlasenica, a town that became a byword for ethnic cleansing. In mid-1992, Serbian forces occupied, then systematically emptied the town of its Bosniak population. This wasn't random violence, it was a campaign. House-to-house searches, summary executions, and forced deportations. The UN's International Criminal Tribunal called it one of the most ruthless campaigns of the war. Imagine your entire town 63% Bosniak reduced to zero in months. Demographic engineering is the technical term, forcibly changing the makeup of a population. The reality? Murder, rape, and terror. Now you might be thinking, did anyone escape? A few hundred survived, but most were killed or forced out. The aim wasn't just territory, it was to erase a people from the map. Events like Vlasenica set the template for what would become genocide on a far larger scale in Bosnia. Let's talk about Srebrenica, a name that now echoes with tragedy. As war raged, tens of thousands of Bosniaks crowded into this small town, hoping for UN protection after it was declared a safe area. But the reality was grim. 0 people, many living in stairwells and shelters, survived on dwindling aid. Humanitarian corridors, narrow escape routes negotiated by the UN, were frequently blocked or abused by besieging forces. A small contingent of 600 lightly armed Dutch UN troops was tasked with protection, a mission impossible against a determined, heavily armed enemy. Now, you might ask, how could a UN safe area fall so catastrophically? The answer lies in a mix of underestimation, lack of support, and a ruthless enemy. Srebrenica's fall set the stage for Europe's worst massacre since World War II horror we must confront in detail. July 1995. Serbian forces, led by General Ratko Mladic and under Directive 7 from Karadzic, storm Srebrenica. Men and boys are separated from women, classic gendercide. The targeting of a group based on gender as a means of extermination. Let me walk you through a day in this nightmare. Men are herded into warehouses, schools, and fields. No food, no water, only terror. Personal belongings are piled in Bernada, symbolic erasure of identity. Over several days, mass executions unfold. In the Kravica warehouse, over 1,000 are killed in a single afternoon with gunfire and grenades. At other sites, prisoners are forced to dig their own graves, the ultimate humiliation. You might wonder, how could anyone survive? Almost none did. Out of over 0 men and boys, only a handful escaped. The rest were killed, buried in mass graves, and hidden by bulldozers, a tactic known as forensic countermeasures. The scale and organization prove this was no accident. Srebrenica wasn't just a massacre, it was a textbook case of genocide. With the massacre's end, the world finally woke up. The Bosnian War ended months later with the Dayton Agreement, but justice was far from immediate. The UN established the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, landmark in international law. Leaders like Karadzic and Mladic faced trial for crimes against humanity and war crimes, terms with deep legal meaning requiring proof of systematic, targeted violence. Perpetrators received sentences life in some cases, decades in others. But can any prison term undo the loss? Of course not. Justice, in this sense, is both necessary and inadequate. Let me pose a hard question. When we say never again, do we really mean it? The Bosnian Genocide shows that the machinery of hate can still be assembled even in modern Europe. Our task now is memory and vigilance, learning the lessons, honoring the victims, and refusing to look away when the warning signs return. Never again must finally mean something.